Hello, thank you for stopping by. Today I'm going to show you this Snapper lawn tractor. It's an LT200 with a 22 horsepower engine. And I'm going to show you the condition it was in when I got it. This is the worst scruff mark. And down here, you can see that there was a fire. The reason this was given away was because of this fire. Looking at it, we could see that there was a fire on top of the muffler, but the carburetor intake, the top plastic, the hoses, nothing here was burnt. This leads me to believe that the fire didn't last long. What caused the fire? I don't know if it was a leaky carburetor, too much oil, maybe the oil was spitting out someplace. I have no idea what caused this fire. All I know, I picked this tractor up. It's sitting here almost 2 years, and it seems like every time I touch this tractor, something else comes up that I have to take care of. Finally, I'm getting to it, and it's in worse condition now than when I got it. You can see we had little visitors. This has an Intech 22 horsepower twin, and we know it's got age on it because, again, it's listed horsepower other than cc's. Now, this sat for about 2 years. This filter in here is clean. Well, fairly clean. I know this was garaged where it was kept before, and we can see our little friends got inside. You can see that nest in there. Normally, I would crank it over. I would just put a jumper on the starter, see if it cranks, and so on. But I know it was running because they got rid of it because while it was running, it caught on fire. The first thing I'm going to do is take this engine cowling off, get that nest out or whatever's in there out, and to see if those wires are chewed up. And if they are, it's my error because they weren't chewed up when I got this. Like I said, every time I touch this, something else came up. Now look at this. There's hardly any oil in here. So this might have an engine oil leak someplace in here. I'm gonna have to get in there. I can't see. Looks kind of dirty back in there. And it just might be that something loosened up on the bottom, maybe the gaskets. I have the camera on the bottom, I can't see what it's videoing. It might be down here someplace. There was a leak. How it got up to here, I don't know. Maybe the fan's spinning it. Not sure what went on, but we can see right here on top of the valve cover, there's oil. This shouldn't be here. So somehow that oil got from the engine to the muffler. And after I remove this cowling, I'll show you what I find underneath. I've mentioned this in several of my videos, but as I was loosening these bolts all the way around to take this cowling off, I thought I'd mention it again. This has been sitting out here for 2 years, but I had a snow blower that was behind my house, about 20 feet away from my house, a good 70 feet away from the tree line. And I went to start it one year, and I found a mouse nest underneath. And I was fortunate enough that when I pulled the pull starter, I couldn't move it. There was such a large mouse nest in there that it blocked the flywheel. And I say fortunate because if that snowblower started with that mouse nest under there, more than likely I would have blew the engine. You got to remember, the only thing that cools this engine is the air that circulates around it and the oil, but there isn't any water jacket around this engine like in a car. I just want to show you what's under here. We have these bolts all around. This one was missing. You need a 10mm wrench. If you could get these ratchet wrenches, they help out a lot. I have a link in the description down below if you don't. I needed a vice grip. Bolts on the other side were stripped. There's one here in the front, one here on the other side front, and you just have to loosen them. You don't have to take them all the way out. And this is the one that was stripped. In addition to that, under the air cleaner, there's a screw you can get out with a screwdriver. Or you could use a wrench on this also. Don't want to lose this. Hey guys.
Hey, how's your day going?
Okay, watch this. Watch the mouse nest that's under this engine.
There's a mouse under it?
Maybe a mouse, definitely a mouse nest. Besides these bolts around the side, you have to take the cover off that keeps leaves and whatnot from going onto the fan. I'm going to remove these screws and I'll be back. Okay, I pulled that cover off. Now I can lift this cowling out. I had one of my little helpers there, Anthony, helping me. Right, Anthony? All right, let's see. And here we go. Let's see, mouse nest. This over here, if the engine were to run, this would definitely blow a head gasket. Maybe you blow a valve because of this. So rule of thumb, whenever your equipment sits for any length of time, especially the beginning of the season, whether it's a snow blower, whether it's a lawnmower, take this cowling off and check this out. Usually at the end of the season, I take them off and I clean it up. Now I can see some oil in here also. We have mouse droppings in here. We have, well, good news is they didn't chew the coil wire. This is usually the first victim. First thing to go is the coil wire. This wire, well, I'm gonna have to check. This wire looks like it might have been chewed on a little here. I might be able to tape that up. I don't have any, but they also have that liquid tape. Again, I'm going on the assumption that this runs. I'm going to get a mask and some gloves. I'm going to clean this out. Let's see the oil in here. Okay, the oil in here is clean. Not much of it, but it's clean. Well, let me get to this unpleasant task. And the next thing I'm going to do after that is I'm going to hook up a battery jumper to the starter to see if everything turns the way it should. Now the starter gear looks like it might be shot, and the starter, I don't know why there's so much rust in here. Even leaving it outside, it had the hood on it and rain shouldn't have gotten in there, but it is what it is, and we'll see what we have. I was trying to see if I could get this engine to pop. Sprayed carburetor cleaner in there, but I believe the starter wasn't turning the engine over quick enough. I tried hooking it up to the battery. I tried hooking it up straight to the starter. Now I just charged this battery for about a half hour. I have the jumper on it, and I want to see if the starter still spins slowly. I'm going to take this battery out and replace it with the battery that I have in another tractor that's running without any issues. If that doesn't spin this engine over quick enough, then I know I have a problem with the starter. So let me try it one more time with this hooked up and see if we get any spark or any action at all. Had my foot under the blade there. Okay, now it's not turning over. All right, I'm gonna replace the battery, see if it turns over. If it doesn't turn over quick enough, the next part of the video will be me pulling the starter apart to see if it's burnt on the inside. All right, this is where I'm at. I changed out the battery to one that's in another tractor that's working without any issue. The starter still won't get this engine to spin with any kind of speed, and that was with the spark plugs out. I have the spark plugs back in. It looks like it might rain. I don't want to get caught out in the rain with this thing wide open. But what I'm doing now, I'm taking out these coils. You can see the rust that's on them, because even if it does spin, good chance I'm not going to get spark. A little bit of rust like this, I've seen them worse than this and run without any issue. But these here, for whatever reason, they rusted up like crazy. Even down in here, I don't know why. This was closed off, and I noticed there's a lot of corrosion in here. I don't know if this is from mouse urine. Not so much on here, but down on these cylinder heads. But that said, I'm going to clean up these coils. I'm going to open up the starter, just these two bolts, and get through the front. I'm going to take a look on the inside, see if there's anything that looks like it's off. Hope I don't have to replace this. And I'm getting juice coming down to the starter, so that's not an issue. Current's flowing all the way through. And to get the starter off, if you have the same unit, if the camera's picking this up, again, I can't see. This requires a 1/2-inch socket. And this bolt over here, am I touching it? Yeah, there's another bolt up here. Requires a torque screwdriver, number 30 torque. And it just barely fits by the castle nut on the starter, but you will be able to get by it and open it up. So I'm off to cleaning the coils up and taking the starter apart. Once I open the starter, if I find anything off with the starter, I'll show you. If not, I don't know, I just put it back and try again with this battery. I'm going to let this battery charge for a couple hours. I was using it the other day and I stopped and started the other tractor several times with no issues at all. So I don't think it's the battery, but don't know. It reads 12 volts when I put a gauge on it, 13 volts, but still could have a weak cell in there. It's an older battery also. That's enough talk. Let me get to it and I'll show you the results when I'm done. I finished cleaning up these coils. I'm going to put them back on. You can see how I got that rust off. This is what it all looked like before. And I did the front where it makes the contact. And over here it also makes contact. This is where the ground for the coil is. Same with the other one. This one cleaned up a little nicer. This one was pitted. The first one here, this was pitted. You can see over here if the camera's picking this up. It's a little rough yet. And for the magnet, I just cleaned up this magnet also. This was pretty rusted over here. The magnet looked like this prior to me cleaning it. So now I'm going to put the coils back on, and before I take that starter apart, I have it off, but I'm going to put it back on. I have another battery and another battery jumper that I'm going to see if this will spin properly, and if not, I'll take that starter apart. I have the starter off, but before I start on that, I wanted to see if this would even start at all. So what I did, I poured a little bit of gas into the carburetor. I used my non-OSHA approved method where I put a drill with a socket on here to spin the flywheel, and when I did that, it started up. It ran until it burnt that gas out. Next, I connected a spare gas tank to this pump with some gas in it, because the tank on this unit is under the seat. I don't know what's in the tank, so the tank I used I knew was clean, the line was new, and the gas was clean. It wouldn't start. So then, with the gas still connected to the pump, I disconnect the line going to the carburetor just to check to see whether the pump was working. The pump did pump gas out. So we have gas coming from the pump but not going through the carburetor. The unit starts pouring gas in here and spinning the flywheel. So now I know I definitely have a blockage in this carburetor. And to get this carburetor off, it's been a while since I had one of these. If I remember correctly, there's these 4 bolts. There's one here, and this happens to be loose, this one. I have no pressure on this at all, and it loosened right up. Don't know if that's from vibration or if somebody was in here before. You could either use a socket, or this is a T, I believe 20, yeah, this is a T25 torque screwdriver. And there's 4 of these bolts, and if I'm not mistaken, when you remove these 4 bolts, 2 on top, and there's 2, let's see if I get this in there, 2 on the bottom, 1 on each side, right here, and on the other side. The only thing that'll be holding it on then is this fuel line and the throttle control linkage. I'm going to get this carburetor off, bring it to the bench, and I'm going to work on this before the starter, because then I want to put this back on, use my non-OSHA approved method. I don't recommend that you do it this way. So now I'm going to take this off, clean it up. I still have a mess over here, and that'll help me clean out in between here too, because even though I picked through this with a screwdriver, I blew it out with a compressor, there's still a lot of stuff in here, and this all has to come out before we get this into use, because this will overheat this cylinder. The valves will overheat and something will definitely go. I'll get this off and I'll show you what I find when I get into it. Just a quick update. It's been about a week since I worked on this tractor. Between the rain and the injury to my hand, I haven't been able to do much. My hand now, the swelling's down about 90%, and it's healing up pretty decent, and I almost have full use of my hand, so I'm going to get back onto this tractor. What I have done so far, I have the carburetor removed, And because this video is getting quite long, I'm going to make 2 videos. If you would like to see how I clean out the carburetor, hit that link up above, and I'll put the description down below so you don't have to link on it now to see how I clean out this carburetor. But what I did before I took the carburetor off was I poured some gas into the carburetor, and I used my non-OSHA approved method for starting this. I put a big socket on here, and I used the drill to spin it. I do have the starter off, and this engine fired up, and it ran until that gas ran out. Did it a couple of more times, and it started right up. But while I have everything opened and exposed, I'm going to check the valves. I went online to get the specs. I'm going to gap the valves on both sides. Once I check the valve clearance, I'll be reinstalling the carburetor, and then we'll see if it's going to run. So what I have this carburetor cleaned out. Now I'm going to mount this carburetor. The way this gets mounted, this is for the anti-kickback solenoid. This has to be connected to the solenoid. This tube has to be connected to the back of the carburetor. And we have this linkage here. Gets connected to the governor. And then we have this linkage to this piece over here. I'm not going to be able to hold this camera still and put this all together, so I'm showing you how it goes together before I do it. Show you what it looks like when I'm done. This way we won't have jumpy video all over the place. I'm going to put this back together. It's going to be a few minutes and I'll be back. The carburetor is mounted. I have the fuel line from the carburetor to the fuel pump, from the fuel pump to this gas tank with a little bit of gas over here. This is an external tank. This is the original fuel line. I'm not sure what's in the tank. From what I can see, it looks like it's clean, but I just don't want to take any chances. Now I still have the starter off because I didn't pull that apart yet. Have to keep safety in mind. I have my fire extinguisher. Remember, this tractor came to me originally because it was on fire. This is a method I use on push mowers and other tractors when I want to see if they'll run, and I don't want to take a chance of what's in the tank going into the carburetor. This, what I'm going to do now to start it, is definitely not recommended. I'm not telling you to do this. I suggest that you don't. And here we go. Let's see. I have the choke all the way up. I have the throttle all the way up. Let's see what's going to happen. I have to put this camera down because I need 2 hands for this. Okay, well, we know that it runs. We were smoking like crazy here, so I don't know how much oil is in this muffler. When I had these spark plugs out, this was sitting for quite a while. I did shoot a couple of squirts of oil down in there, not much, but that would contribute to the smoke plus whatever else was in here. Now What I did notice, I didn't have any control on it with the throttle. When I was moving the throttle, nothing was happening. The only thing that was controlling it was the choke. When I opened the choke, she was revving all the way up. Here's the throttle. The throttle is moving. That's full throttle. And it looks like it's all the way back. So I don't know why this thing revved the way it did. At least I know that it runs. The throttle issue, that's something else altogether different. It started right up. It didn't take long for it to spin. So for now I'm going to remove this gas tank. Put this cowling back on so this stays covered up. After I have this all buttoned up, I'm going to go take that starter apart, see what I find in there. This video is getting quite long, so I won't be showing the starter, taking it apart and putting it together. I have it on the bench now. If it looks good, I'm going to put it in, see if it starts, ride it around a little bit. I'll show you that, and that should be a wrap other than cleaning this up. That's water in there. We had rain for 3 days. This all rusted up before I started. I even cleaned this up again. But that's it for now. I mentioned to you earlier that I would show anything that I found a little off with the starter. For one, to get this clip off was something else, because this was completely rusted up here. When I finally got the clip out, I couldn't get this piece off because it formed somehow this knurled upward and it was all rusted, so I had to file that down to get it off. Once I got that off, also it's been a long time since I worked on a starter, but whenever I take them apart, I mark where everything has to go back so I don't have to guess. See that scratch mark there? There's a scratch mark on this side to line it up. So that's number one. Once you get that C-clip off, everything in the front just pulls out. I tapped this out from the front, and this is what I found. This over here, commentator, this all has to be cleaned. Everything else in here looks okay. I don't see anything that looks burnt. But what I did find, and by the way, this was all covered with grease. What I did find, these brushes pretty well worn. See the way this brush is popping out over here? I made a little jig to get these brushes back on because this is a little tricky. But all these brushes should be pushed forward. That's what these springs are for. But if you look at them, look at it close. If you look at it, they're all tucked in. I think what happened, this overheated. And see this plastic? The camera's picking it up. I had to look twice. I thought they were being held in the way they should be, but that's not the case. Let me see. I'm going to set up this camera so I can point out to you what I'm talking about. Here's the brush. Here's the spring. But the spring isn't pushing it forward because we have this plastic that looks like it melted. Where am I? Can't get a good view. Here we go. This side's better. We have this plastic that looks like it melted around the brush, keeping the brush in. These brushes have to make contact with this part, with this. And it's making some kind of contact because it is spinning, but you saw earlier how it was spinning slow. This may be the problem. I don't know until I clean it up and put it back together. I'll find out. Plus I put a little grease in here, and the grease that I used in here is that 00 grease. It's almost like a liquid, but I just put very little in here in this bushing. And this bushing over here in the front was pretty dirty. I put a piece of sandpaper on a pencil and I rolled it around in there to clean it up a little bit. And I'll put a dab of that grease on here also. This is a brass bushing. Doesn't have any bearings. And the magnets in here are in good shape. They're not cracked. every so often I would find one of these starters with cracked magnets. And the way they got cracked, usually when the starter doesn't work, a lot of times if you just tap it, it'll pass the dead spot that's on the starter and it'll start up. People hit it too hard or too often and they crack those magnets. So inside looks good. This looks good, just needs a cleaning. This I'm going to play with to loosen up these brushes. I'm not going to show you the installation of this. As a matter of fact, this would make a good video. I just have to get this moving. With the injury I sustained on my hand this week, I was over a week behind on the work I have to do. And with this particular tractor, I'm 2 years behind. Oh, one other thing I want to show you. Earlier I mentioned I didn't know what was in the tank, so I put some fresh gas in there. I used the drill to spin the engine. Pump is working fine, and you can see this gas over here, what's coming out. So I'm going to do it a few more times. I stopped because I didn't want to burn out the drill. It took a while for the gas to come through because the gas tank is under the seat and the pump has to pump it up. Instead of going into the carburetor, I have it coming into this. I'm going to clean that starter up, put it back together. If the starter works, I won't have to use the drill. Once that's all together, I'll button this up and to see if I can get this running, and hopefully that oil will burn off and it won't continue to smoke. Earlier, you may have been wondering why I used a separate gas tank and hose to get this tractor started. This is why. Well, I put a little gas into the tank and cranked it with the starter, and this is the gas I got out. Look at this. This over here, this came out first, then it started coming out like this. Smells pretty bad. I don't know if there's any stabilizer in there, why it's that color, but this is the color it came out. Look at that. And there's plenty of water in there. Could you see that? You see the red on the bottom, and you can see the beads of water. So if you can't drain the tank before you start an engine, use a substitute tank to feed it. I do this quite often when I work on push mowers, just to see if they're going to start. If they start, then I go through the whole routine of cleaning it out. If they don't start, I try to figure out why. If they're beyond hope, then I just take the parts I can use. I got this tractor started yesterday, drove it around a little bit, and even cut some grass. I ran it until it ran out of gas, and now I'm back on it today. I'm having a problem with the throttle. The throttle doesn't control anything. It does move. The only way I was able to control it is with the choke, and I think I know what the problem is. Let's get this started, put it up on the ramps, we'll see what we have. Just showing you that when I moved the throttle up and down, it had no effect. The only thing that controlled the speed of the engine was this choke. I'm going to let this cool off for a few minutes, then I'm going to show you what I believe the problem is. I'm going to give you the best view of this as possible. Here's the throttle. When I move the throttle, we can see that it's doing what it should down here. But what's not moving is this governor. See this governor linkage? This is stuck. This governor linkage should be able to go up and down, and it's not moving at all. So either something snapped on the inside, it's broken on the inside, or somebody adjusted this once before and they adjusted it incorrectly. Coming to this side of the tractor, we have this view here. This linkage should be able to move up and down. So what I'm going to do now is to loosen this nut. Let me get some light in here. I won't be able to show this on camera because I can't hold the camera, the light, and do what I have to do all at once. So I'm going to loosen this nut. That stud that's sticking out, I'm going to turn it. That stud has to be turned, and the way that's done is have the throttle open all the way, so we can see when we turn the throttle that it's moving it this way. So that stud has to be turned the same direction that the throttle's moving, and this has to be held at the same time. So this has to be held, this has to be turned, and here's where it gets a little tricky. This is a real particular bad spot over here. Usually these are easier to get to. Okay, so that nut has to be loosened, that stud has to be turned, that lever has to be turned, then it has to be retightened. I want to point out a rookie mistake. Here's the throttle. When I move the throttle, you can see it moving. Now it's moving the governor arm. Watch closely, I'm going to go slow. See that governor arm move? It still may have to be adjusted. I'm talking about this arm right here. It still may have to be adjusted. But what caused the problem, here's the rookie mistake. When I put this float belt back on, the anti-kickback solenoid, this right here, is supposed to be in the front, not in the back. And what that was doing, we're leaking gas here. And what that was doing was hitting on the lever that goes to the governor. So I'm going to go in the garage, reverse that bowl, put everything back together again, and see if I have to make that adjustment down below, or if that was the only issue. I cut my lawn with this machine yesterday, let it sit overnight. It's a little low on oil now, and I have to change the oil. So let's see how it starts up the next day with a cold start. I have the choke all the way up, the throttle all the way up, and let's see what we get. Starts right up cold, nice. So not bad for a machine that was on fire, sat for a little over 2 years in the weeds. And to recap what I did to restore this mower was: 1, remove the cowling, then the mouse nest. 2, take off the carburetor, clean it out. 3 was to take the starter apart because it wasn't spinning with any kind of force. I had to free up the brushes that were in there, clean up the commutator, put it all back together. 4, I adjusted the valves on both cylinders. And 5, the easiest, was this tire. This was the only tire that wasn't holding air. I put some slime in there, and it's been holding now for over a week. It's a wrap. If you found this video useful, or you have any questions, post your comments down below. Be sure to give it a like. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. Just hit that Joe Z button. And until next time, everyone, stay safe.